Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, December 26th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 56.8 degrees, with a low dipping to 51.9 degrees. So bundle up a bit if you're heading out after the holiday festivities. Coming up, we'll break down the motivations behind President Trump's decision to launch airstrikes on ISIS targets in Nigeria over Christmas, and unpack what drove Iran to capture a foreign tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. We'll also cover other key developments from around the world, including updates on global tensions and domestic headlines. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay with us. It was a dramatic Christmas night announcement from the White House. Ethan, bring us up to speed on what happened and why it matters.
Late on Christmas Day, President Donald Trump said the United States carried out, quote, powerful and deadly, end quote, airstrikes on Islamic State targets in northwest Nigeria. According to the Associated Press via PBS NewsHour, the operation was coordinated with Nigerian authorities and framed as a response to the killing of Christians. Reuters and the Washington Post report that it is a rare U.S. kinetic action in West Africa, and it comes amid the administration's sharper rhetoric on religious persecution. As of this morning, December 26th, the strikes remain a focal point for both counter-terror strategy and diplomatic messaging.
What exactly did the strikes hit, and where?
U.S. Africa Command says the missiles hit Islamic State-linked camps in Sokoto State, a remote corner of northwest Nigeria along the Niger border. NPR reports initial assessments point to fighters tied to the Islamic State Sahel province, a faction locals sometimes call Lakurawa. OSINT analysts and Nigerian outlets like Humangle geolocated impacts around forested enclaves in Gudu and Tangaza local government areas. Early imagery showed burn scars and damage consistent with high-yield munitions.
How were these strikes carried out without U.S. planes overhead?
Military.com and the UK Defense Journal point to more than a dozen Tomahawk land attack missiles launched from a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Gulf of Guinea. That standoff option lets the U.S. avoid sending manned aircraft into Nigerian airspace while still hitting fixed targets with precision. According to NPR, weeks of surveillance flights and shared intelligence helped refine the target set. It is a playbook we have seen in other theaters when access or politics make overflight tricky.
The president tied this directly to attacks on Christians. Is that the full picture in Sokoto?
It is more complicated on the ground. Analysts cited by the International Crisis Group and SBM Intelligence say the Sokoto insurgents mostly prey on Muslim communities through extortion, cattle theft, and harsh enforcement of their version of Sharia. The Washington Post notes the group's origins as a vigilante force that radicalized over time, not as a sectarian anti-Christian militia. So the administration's religious framing resonates globally, but it does not neatly map onto this particular hotspot.
Still, the administration leaned hard into that theme. What did the president say?
In his Truth Social post, he said he had warned terrorists to stop slaughtering Christians and declared, quote, there would be hell to pay, end quote. He praised, quote, numerous perfect strikes, end quote, and ended with, quote, Merry Christmas to all, including the dead terrorists, end quote. NPR and the Associated Press say this mirrors months of messaging that put global Christian persecution at the center of U.S. policy. Supporters see it as moral clarity. Critics call it an oversimplification of a tangled conflict.
How did Nigeria describe the mission and its purpose?
Nigerian officials emphasized sovereignty and joint planning. Reuters reports, Foreign Minister Yusuf Tuggar said the strikes were coordinated with Abuja and approved by President Bola Tinubu as part of broader security cooperation. He stressed they target terrorists regardless of religion and that Nigeria's struggle is not a Christian-Muslim war. Their statement, carried by Channels TV, framed it as precision action under international law.
Was this a surprise move, or had the U.S. telegraphed it?
There were breadcrumbs. The AP notes that in November, the White House threatened aid suspensions and ordered planning if Abuja did not curb attacks. The State Department recently redesignated Nigeria a country of particular concern under religious freedom law and added visa curbs on officials linked to violence. And just a week earlier, on December 18th, the U.S. struck Islamic State targets in Syria after Americans were killed, signaling a more aggressive posture.
What do we know about casualties and collateral damage so far?
Officials are being cautious. AFRICOM says multiple militants were killed, and Nigeria's foreign ministry echoed that while keeping numbers vague. No civilian deaths have been confirmed as of today, but Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International told reporters they're checking reports of missile fragments near villages. The Los Angeles Times and CBS News note both governments are emphasizing precision to head off comparisons to a Nigerian Air Force mishap in the region last year.
You mentioned Lakurawa. How does that faction fit into the Islamic State map?
ACLED data and a United Nations monitoring report from February say the group pledged allegiance to the Islamic State Sahel branch and expanded from southern Niger into Sokoto. They tax locals under a zakat system, ban music and tobacco, and enforce beard and dress rules, according to regional researchers. They call some of their hideouts Darul Islam, and OSINT posts highlighted camps at places like Gwangwano and Tunagara. It is a mix of ideology and bandit economics, which has made them resilient.
What about the timing on Christmas Day? Was that deliberate symbolism?
It certainly landed that way at home. Iowa Public Radio and KPBS say the holiday timing dovetailed with the administration's focus on defending Christians, and the president's message leaned into that. Open Doors, which compiles the World Watch List, reports hundreds of millions of Christians face persecution globally, with Nigeria among the deadliest. The symbolism amplifies the message, even if the specific Sokoto context is more nuanced.
Did the Pentagon echo the president's framing?
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth praised the mission and said the killing of innocent Christians must end, while thanking Nigeria for cooperation. He added, quote, "More to come. Merry Christmas," end quote, on X. That aligns with the White House tone, though AFRICOM's public affairs stuck to cleaner military language about precision strikes and coordination. Reuters even noted a tweak from calling it a request by Nigeria to calling it a coordinated operation, to avoid perceptions of dependency.
How unusual is U.S. kinetic action inside Nigeria?
Quite unusual. The Washington Post reports U.S. counter-terror operations in Africa have focused more on the Sahel, the Horn, and the Lake Chad Basin peripheries, often through training or limited strikes in places like Somalia. Nigeria values its autonomy and has been reluctant to invite foreign militaries into the fight. That is why the careful language around sovereignty and coordination matters as much as the missiles themselves.
How are Nigerians reacting so far?
Mixed but leaning supportive, at least online. Business Day Nigeria and Truth Nigeria captured relief from residents who call these militants bandits and feel abandoned by the state. At the same time, some civil society voices warn about sovereignty erosion and urge transparency on targets and civilian risk. The immediate test will be whether the strikes disrupt extortion and movement corridors in those border forests.
What's the risk of escalation or mission creep for the U.S.?
Analysts told El País and the Times of Israel that sustained involvement would strain already limited U.S. bandwidth in Africa. Washington has drawn down some footprints on the continent while focusing on Europe and the Indo-Pacific. If militants disperse or retaliate, pressure could build for follow-on strikes, which is the classic cycle in counterinsurgency. Policymakers may try to keep this as a 1-2 punch tied to intelligence cues, rather than a new campaign.
Are there signs the strikes actually degraded the group?
Too early for definitive calls, but hints are there. The Washington Post cites officials saying 2 primary camps took heavy hits, which could disrupt command and logistics for weeks. Reuters adds that the militants rely on those forest sanctuaries, so knocking out storage and sleeping quarters can scatter cells. If extortion rounds slow or checkpoints disappear, locals will notice quickly.
You mentioned the narrative gap between religious persecution and local realities. Why does that gap matter?
Because it shapes policy and perceptions. The Guardian reports Nigerian officials worry that casting Sokoto as a Christian-Muslim battlefield could inflame tensions far from where these cells operate, especially in mixed Middle Belt states. Human Rights Watch warns that labeling a complex criminal-insurgent blend as a faith war can fuel reprisals and vigilante abuses. Accurate framing helps target the right levers: governance, policing, and cross-border smuggling routes, not just ideology.
How does this connect to other Islamic State branches in West Africa?
There is cross-pollination. The Islamic State West Africa province, which grew from Boko Haram, operates mainly around Lake Chad, while the Sahel branch stretches through Niger and Mali. According to the Washington Post, the Sokoto cells straddle that seam, drawing on networks that move people and goods across porous borders. The UN monitors say those ties can bring trainers and bomb makers, so hitting safe havens on one side has regional effects.
What's Nigeria's strategy after this strike?
Tugger told Reuters the strikes are part of an ongoing process with partners, not a one-off. Abuja is trying to pair military pressure with local amnesties and vigilante integration, though results have been uneven. International Crisis Group notes that without better rural policing and courts, militants can reconstitute quickly. The next few weeks will show whether the army and police can hold cleared areas.
Are there legal concerns about U.S. action inside Nigeria?
Less so when the host state concurs. PBS, citing AP reporting, says the Nigerian government publicly affirmed consent and framed the mission under international law. The bigger debates are political: whether Parliament was properly briefed and how much sovereignty Abuja is willing to trade for impact. For Washington, the legal hook is counter-terror authority against Islamic State affiliates.
How are faith groups and advocacy organizations responding?
Open Doors and allied evangelical voices have applauded the move as overdue protection for vulnerable Christians, citing grim statistics for last year. At the same time, Amnesty and local rights groups call for transparent casualty assessments and careful language that avoids stigmatizing Muslim communities. NPR captured that split, noting how domestic U.S. politics and global advocacy can pull the narrative in different directions. It is a balancing act between moral urgency and granular accuracy.
What should we watch in the next 48 hours?
3 things. First, follow-up assessments from AFRICOM and Abuja on militant casualties and whether there were any civilian injuries. Second, local reporting from outlets like HumAngle and Global Upfront on ground movements, checkpoints, or retaliatory threats. Third, any edits in official messaging, since Reuters already caught one shift from request to coordination.
And longer term, what's the most important unknown?
Whether this signals a new U.S. willingness to use force in West Africa when partners ask. The Times of Israel and El País caution that one strike can spiral into a pattern if intelligence keeps flowing and political incentives align. Conversely, if Abuja prefers lower-profile cooperation after this splash, it could remain an exception. The durability of the gains in Sokoto will also tell us if standoff strikes can move the needle in a rural insurgency.
Last thing, Ethan. How does this episode change U.S.-Nigeria relations?
It deepens security ties, but exposes a narrative fault line. Nigeria wants help against violent groups without having its conflicts defined for it, and the Washington Post notes that is a recurring tension with big power partners. If Washington calibrates its public framing to match local realities while still defending human rights, cooperation can grow. If not, domestic blowback in Nigeria could complicate future requests.
Ethan, really helpful context on a fast-moving story the day after Christmas. Thanks for breaking it down. Good morning. We're following a high-stakes move in the Strait of Hormuz today. Chloe's here with what we know and what it means.
Good morning, Grace. Iranian state media says the Revolutionary Guard Navy seized a foreign-flagged oil tanker near Qasem Island on Tuesday, which was December 24th. According to ABC News, citing the Associated Press, Tehran calls it a major anti-smuggling operation. They say the ship held about 4 million liters of illicit diesel, worth roughly $5.22 million.
Do we know which tanker or who owns it?
Not yet. Iranian officials haven't released the name, the flag state, or the owner, the official IRNA news agency reported. Reuters notes independent trackers like marine traffic and tankertrackers.com haven't identified it either, likely because the vessel's transponder was switched off, which is common in gray market runs. That opacity makes independent verification tricky at this stage.
What happened to the crew?
16 foreign crew members were detained during what Iran described as a precise and coordinated boarding, according to coverage echoed by Kurdistan 24. No violence was reported, and the ship was impounded for judicial proceedings in Hormozgan province. The provincial chief justice, Mujtaba Goharmani, says a court warrant authorized the seizure and the crew is being questioned.
What's Iran's legal justification here?
Iranian officials say the diesel was smuggled from subsidized domestic supplies, allegedly moved by ship-to-ship transfers from smaller boats, then bound for offloading outside the Gulf, possibly toward Fujairah in the UAE, according to IRN and reports summarized by the Ottawa Courier. They argue that violates Iranian law and justifies a seizure inside their territorial waters. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, though, often labels similar actions as illegal boardings that threaten commercial navigation, as CBS News has reported.
How big was the cargo, in context?
By smuggling standards, 4 million liters, about 25,000 barrels, is significant, but not huge. For comparison, Reuters notes Iran took control of a ship with about 781,000 barrels in April of 2023, and state-linked media said another 6 million liters were seized near Jask earlier this month. So this case sits in the mid-range of recent Iranian interdictions.
Is this part of a broader pattern?
It is. Kurdistan 24 points out the Revolutionary Guard has stepped up anti-smuggling announcements this fall, framing them as protecting national resources from organized networks. It follows a November seizure of the Marshall Islands flag Talara, which was later released, and another detention earlier this month of crew from India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, as Middle East Monitor and Vanguard reported.
Some analysts see something more than smuggling enforcement. Why?
Timing. This move comes just 16 days after the U.S. Navy seized the Iranian-linked supertanker Skipper off Venezuela under Operation Southern Spear on December 10th. The National and United Against Nuclear Iran have argued, in reporting aggregated by the Times of Israel, that Tehran is signaling a symmetrical response, showing it can impose costs in the Strait of Hormuz after Washington acted far from the Gulf.
Remind us why the strait matters so much.
It's the gateway to the Persian Gulf and only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest. Roughly 1/5 of the world's traded oil and a major share of liquefied natural gas transit through there, as Reuters and Lloyd's List often note. That makes even a single, ambiguous seizure ripple through shipping risk assessments.
What's the U.S. military saying today?
The Fifth Fleet in Bahrain has kept its language cautious, saying it's actively monitoring to ensure freedom of navigation, according to statements carried by CBS News and Al Arabiya. No countermeasures have been announced. The fleet tends to increase patrols and coordinate with commercial shipping, but it avoids directly confronting Iranian units unless U.S. vessels are threatened.
Have markets reacted?
Barely. Reuters and Newsweek point out Brent crude is still trading below $60 a barrel today. Analysts say plentiful supply, from OPEC plus pump levels and surging U.S. output, has dampened the geopolitical premium. A cargo of 25,000 barrels just isn't big enough to move prices in this environment.
Still, does this raise insurance and shipping costs?
It likely nudges them up for transits through the strait. Lloyd's List has documented how even isolated seizures can drive war risk premiums higher for a few weeks. Operators then adjust routing, speed, and crew readiness, which adds costs even if prices don't spike.
What do we know about the ship's path before the seizure?
Very little. Marine traffic and tankertrackers.com haven't published a definitive track, and AIS gaps are common in smuggling. Iranian officials claim the tanker was leaving their territorial waters near Keshem when they moved in, which would put it close to heavy traffic lanes edging toward the open Gulf.
You mentioned speculation about its identity. What's that about?
Some reports, like an Associated Press item republished by the Ottawa Courier, floated the possibility of links to prior smuggling networks, comparing it to the Marshall Islands-flagged NEOV, which was entangled in sanctions disputes from 2021 to 2023. But there's no confirmation, and Reuters says no IMO number or registry details have been made public. Until those surface, it's guesswork.
What's Iran's message to its domestic audience?
Iranian outlets like Tasnim and ILKHA cast this as a blow to smugglers who siphon subsidized fuel from the public. They emphasize the Revolutionary Guard's precision and the judiciary's oversight to underline legitimacy. It's a narrative of protecting national wealth against foreign-linked networks.
And the international reaction?
Western capitals are cautious but concerned. Al Arabiya and CBS News highlight the Fifth Fleet's monitoring stance, while Lloyd's List notes anxiety among shipowners over a fragile Gulf security climate. Radio Free Europe adds that crews can become bargaining chips, raising fears of diplomatic standoffs.
Put this in the longer timeline of Iran's maritime playbook.
There's a pattern of calibrated pressure. We've seen limpet mine attacks in 2019 that the West blamed on Tehran, the seizure of the Portuguese-flagged MSC Ares in April 2024, and a deadly drone strike on an Israeli-linked ship in 2021. Each episode reminds shippers that Tehran can escalate at sea, especially when it wants leverage in wider disputes.
You brought up the recent war. How does that factor?
The June 12-day war between Iran and Israel left scars on both sides. Israeli strikes killed senior Iranian commanders and scientists. Iran's missile salvos killed 28 people in Israel, as NPR and regional outlets documented at the time. The U.S.-led Operation Midnight Hammer hit Iranian assets, adding pressure. That backdrop makes each maritime incident feel like part of a rolling proxy contest.
What about President Trump's recent policy moves?
The Associated Press and The National reported that on December 17th, President Donald Trump announced what he called a total blockade on sanctioned vessels. That complements the skipper seizure and signals a harder line on Iranian oil flows worldwide. Tehran's move this week reads, to many analysts, like a direct rejoinder.
Are there clear rules of the road here?
The legal picture is messy. Iran claims territorial enforcement against smuggling. Shipowners argue freedom of navigation under international law when outside territorial seas. Without public evidence, like cargo manifests, STS logs, or AIS trails, it's hard for outside observers to judge the merits, and that ambiguity benefits both sides' narratives.
Any sign the crew might be released soon?
Not yet. As of this morning, there are no updates on crew release or the ship's disposition, per wire services. In similar past cases, Iran has sometimes freed crews quickly while holding the vessels, but timing often hinges on negotiations we don't see.
How are shipping companies adapting today?
Many implement heightened transit protocols, extra lookouts, hardened bridge procedures, and tighter AIS discipline when appropriate. Some may delay departures or reroute around congested choke points for a few days. Lloyd's List notes insurers often request more detailed voyage plans after an incident like this.
Does this touch UAE ports like Fujairah?
Potentially, in the sense that Iran alleged the diesel may have been headed toward offloading beyond the Gulf, with Fujairah a frequent bunkering stop, according to IRNA and regional trade reporters. There's no proof this cargo was destined there, but the suggestion underscores how Iran links its domestic fuel leakages to regional trade hubs.
What's different about this seizure compared to November's case?
November's Talara detention ended after a brief period, and the flag state was known, which allowed diplomatic channels to engage quickly. Here, the unknown identity complicates outreach and puts the onus on maritime intelligence to piece together the puzzle. That prolongs uncertainty for shippers transiting nearby routes.
Could this escalate into a broader standoff?
It could, but both sides have reasons to calibrate. The The U.S. wants steady energy flows and prefers targeted actions like the skipper seizure far from Gulf flashpoints. Iran wants leverage without triggering a naval confrontation it can't control, so it often frames actions as law enforcement rather than overt retaliation.
How are energy analysts reading the price risk?
They're discounting it for now. Newsweek's market roundup points to ample supplies and a faded wartime premium since June's spike to near $79. If seizures stack up or hit a recognized Western ship, you'd likely see a sharper move in futures.
What should we watch for in the next few days?
3 things. First, any disclosure of the ship's name, flag, or IMO number, those will unlock tracking data. Second, a statement from the Fifth Fleet if a U.S.-linked ship is involved. And third, whether Iranian courts quickly allege specific smuggling routes supported by documents, which would bolster Tehran's legal case.
Is there precedent for quick name-and-shame releases?
Yes. In prior cases like the Niovi episode, identities emerged within days through registry checks and AIS reconstruction by firms cited by Reuters and Lloyd's List. The silence here suggests either a less transparent registry or deliberate withholding. If it persists, suspicions about political motives will grow.
How do regional players, like Oman or Qatar, factor in?
They often act quietly to de-escalate. Oman, in particular, has a history of shuttle diplomacy when maritime incidents happen near the strait. We haven't seen public moves yet, but back-channel messages usually start quickly after a seizure.
Could insurers refuse coverage for some voyages?
They might tighten terms temporarily. War risk underwriters can raise rates, demand escorts, or exclude certain lanes if incidents cluster, as Lloyd's syndicates did during past Gulf flare-ups. But a blanket refusal is unlikely unless the situation deteriorates sharply.
What about the crew's welfare?
Early reports say no violence in the boarding, which is important. Radio Free Europe notes that crews in similar detentions are usually held on board or ashore under guard, with limited contact. Consular access depends on identifying nationalities, which Iran hasn't disclosed yet.
Why keep their nationalities secret?
It preserves bargaining flexibility and minimizes immediate diplomatic pressure from specific governments. It also prevents rapid media amplification in the crew's home countries. That opacity is a familiar feature of these cases.
Is the IRGC's involvement notable here?
Yes, because the Revolutionary Guard Navy is more assertive than Iran's regular navy. The Washington Post and Reuters, in past analyses, have described how the Guard favors speedboats, surprise boardings, and legal theatrics to maximize leverage. Naming the Guard commander, Brigadier General Abbas Gholamshahi, signals this is a flagship enforcement action.
Does this affect LNG shipments too?
Indirectly. Any risk in the strait affects both oil and liquefied natural gas scheduling, even if LNG tankers weren't targeted. Operators may stagger departures to avoid clustering near the choke point until the dust settles.
You mentioned ship-to-ship transfers. How common are those?
Very common in the shadow fleet, especially for sanctioned commodities. Lloyd's List and TankerTrackers.com have documented nocturnal transfers with AIS dark periods to mask origins. Iran's claim of small boat refueling fits patterns seen across the Gulf and Arabian Sea.
Any signs of coordination with other Iranian agencies?
State media framed it as a judiciary-backed action, with the Hormozgan Chief Justice overseeing the case. That suggests alignment between the Guard and courts to present a lawful front. It's an approach Iran has used to deflect accusations of piracy.
Does Israel factor into this specific incident?
Not directly, based on what's public. But the June war lingers over everything, in strategy, perception, and deterrence. The media line has reported that each side probes the other's red lines at sea, even when the immediate spark involves the U.S.
Are shipping lanes being rerouted today?
AIS plots show normal density through the strait, though some owners are advising masters to hug international traffic separation schemes more tightly. Any rerouting would likely appear if there's a second incident within a week. For now, it's caution, not retreat.
Could we see convoy escorts return?
It's possible if risk edges higher. We saw limited convoying during past Gulf tensions, when tankers sought naval presence for reassurance. The Fifth Fleet hasn't signaled that yet, but it's part of the playbook.
What would confirm Iran's smuggling claims?
Hard documentation cargo manifests, bunker delivery notes, or STS logs showing fuel source and movements. Satellite imagery of transfers would help too. None of that is public as of today.
And what would undercut their case?
Evidence the ship was outside Iranian territorial waters, or that the cargo had lawful origin and destination with proper paperwork. A flag state protest backed by registry records could shift the narrative quickly.
Is this likely to be resolved quietly or loudly?
Quietly, if Iran can claim a legal win and release the crew while keeping the fuel. Loudly, if the ship turns out to be tied to a Western company or allied flag, prompting diplomatic fireworks. We should know which direction in a few days.
Bottom line for listeners?
Iran seized a mystery tanker near Qishim on Tuesday, detaining 16 foreign crew and alleging a multi-million-dollar diesel smuggling run. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is watching, oil prices are steady, and insurers are alert. It fits a pattern of Tehran mixing enforcement with strategic messaging, especially after Washington's own tanker seizure this month.
Chloe, thanks for making sense of a complicated story.
Thanks, Grace. We'll keep tracking developments and any identification of that vessel.
And we'll bring you updates as they come in today. Stay with us. Here are some other headlines. The 119th Congress signed off for 2025 after a year that quite literally stopped the clock, an unprecedented 43-day federal shutdown that grounded plans and pinched pantry programs. Lawmakers then hit the regulatory rewind, deploying the Congressional Review Act to undo 21 rules, largely clipping environmental and financial safeguards from the prior administration. In the session's sprint finish, the House narrowly greenlit the SPEED Act to fast-track federal permitting by tightening the on-ramp for judicial reviews, while Senate Republicans red-lit a mid-census redistricting push backed by the White House. The net effect: agencies trimming sails with cuts and layoffs, energy and finance refashioned in real time, and an executive branch leaning on pen and phone maneuvers as both parties map their routes to the 2026 midterms. Shoppers made a list and I checked it twice, preliminary data point to a resilient 2025 holiday haul, with retail sales excluding autos rising roughly 3.9% to 4.2% year over year. E-commerce led the sleigh with a 7.4% jump as digital deal hunters used artificial intelligence to bag bargains. Nominal spending tapped the trillion-dollar tree, though growth bunched under apparel and electronics, and buy now, pay later rang up a 9% pop. The mood? Cautiously merry. A sturdy labor market and wages outrunning inflation carried the season to a photo finish, but the returns rush begins now, and retailers will watch whether debt-fueled cheer turns into a first-quarter chill in 2026. Call it a barometer wrapped in a barcode. Omni-channel is no longer a trend, it's table stakes. In Malaysia, a gavel thunderclap. Former Prime Minister Najib Razak was found guilty on all 25 counts in his principal 1MDB trial, tied to RM2.28 billion, about $544 million, in misappropriated funds. The court rejected as forgeries the letters underpinning his claim of Saudi largesse and emphasized his unmistakable link to fugitive financier Joe Low. Politically, the verdict is a seismic aftershock, likely straining Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's unity government, which leans on Najib's party UMNO. Legally, the stakes are stacked. With maximums of 15 to 20 years per count, the ruling all but ensures Najib remains behind bars well beyond his already reduced term. The scandal that shadowed a decade may have finally reached its denouement. In South Korea, special prosecutors sought a 10-year sentence for ousted President Yoon Suk-yeol in the first of several trials stemming from his failed martial law declaration. Charges include obstructing justice by blocking his own arrest, violating cabinet members' constitutional rights, and falsifying official documents. The case tests the guardrails of governance, a judiciary tasked with proving that even the highest office has a speed limit. The Constitutional Court removed Yoon in April 2025. Now, a verdict is slated for January 16, 2026, with an insurrection trial to follow in early February that could carry life imprisonment or even capital punishment. Prosecutors also aim to keep him in custody beyond his current detention warrant, set to expire January 18. Japan's cabinet approved a record 9.04 trillion yen defense draft for fiscal 2026, a 3.8% rise and the 12th straight increase, fast-tracking the march to 2% of GDP by March 2026. The blueprint spotlights counterstrike capability, 100.1 billion yen for a Shield coastal drone defense, upgraded Type 12 standoff missiles, and a sixth-generation fighter project with the UK and Italy. Tokyo will also rebrand its Air Self-Defense Force to highlight space, signaling that security now orbits multiple domains. Framed by a severe and complex regional climate and sharpened by tensions with Beijing, especially over Taiwan, the message mixes deterrence with determination. Japan is raising a higher guard for a harder neighborhood. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.